Believe it or not, Bennett may actually be one of the most relatable characters in Genshin Impact, which is a shame because he has yet to get his very own story arc. In fact, this is the sad truth for all of the 4 stars in the game, so we'll only have a limited number of appearances to psychoanalyze him, those being his hangouts and the 2.3 Dragonspine event, Shadows Amidst Snowstorms. Bennett is a lovable adventurer that just wants to have fun, so what could possibly be wrong with him psychologically if he's such a happy-go-lucky guy? This is a little psychology in Teyvat. Even the strongest among us have our weaknesses, and for a budding adventurer like Bennett, his weakness, like for many of us, is found most prominently in himself. Listen to a few of the lines that I picked out that I think encompass his personality, and see if you agree.
Like I said, there's nothing to apologize for. It was my fault for being so hasty in the first place. If only there hadn't been rocks mixed in with the snow on the tree, it wouldn't have made me all dizzy when it fell down onto my head. And then I would have never walked into the Fatui's trap.
Bennett? In a cage? Never saw that coming.
I won't bore you with the rest of the details. Just me being unlucky again.
I fell down a slope and just started rolling.
Uh-oh. Did my bad luck rub off on him when we ran into each other on the mountain?
Do you see a pattern? This is going to be an important question during these psychoses because patterns of behavior are the only way for us to even begin to explain one's psyche. But what is actually more important than one's psychosis itself is the mechanisms by which one initially develops and then propagates throughout their lives. Most psychoses have the unfortunate characteristic of reinforcing themselves within our psyche, but on the flip side, a very common method of treatment is to have others around that understand the psychosis and then offset the ill effects, as you've heard many times already in these videos. These patterns will not be changing with Bennett. I started this video off by saying that Bennett was likely to be one of the most relatable characters in Genshin Impact, and that's because he has fallen victim to a lack of self-esteem, a surprising disorder that I would argue many of us have, or at least know of someone else who has experienced this on a regular basis. A lack of self-esteem is defined as a thinking disorder in which an individual views himself or herself as inadequate, unlovable, and/or incompetent. When we apply this definition to Bennett, the similarities become quite staggering. Just listen to these lines, and remember, these are just a few examples. Bennett is constantly saying stuff like this.
I flipped another insignia just outside the camp! Wrong again!
So your bad luck is all used up. We'll be down the mountain in no time.
Wow! Is this for real? A discount? I mean, sure, but not when I'm around. I've never had such good luck before. It must be because I'm with you. Wow, lucky folk really have it different.
Bennett has this uncanny ability to put himself down no matter what the situation is, and this is ultimately what keeps him from becoming the courageous adventurer that we all want him to become. When I started this channel, I initially wanted to provide one thing for my audience, something new to learn. I started with lore and telling stories, and then leaned into analysis, and finally I've attempted to combine telling stories with learning about psychology. As someone who grew up with self-esteem problems myself in school, this one really hits home for me, and is why I really like Bennett as a character and hope he gets more screen time in the future. I personally think that every story out there has something that everyone can learn from, especially when it comes to our internal psychological struggles. This is why I'm fascinated by Genshin Impact, because the nature of visions allows each character to provide us with a rich example of the extremities of our wants and desires. We can then use these examples to help us overcome said struggles in the real world. What do I mean by this? Well, if a character has a vision, this assumes that they are incredibly ambitious towards a specific goal. Pyro characters are passionate about something, Geo characters are steadfast in their beliefs, and so on and so on. I'll have a link in the description for those that are interested in reading more about this. Pretty much what all the vision holders have in common is that they all believe in something very important to them, more so than the average person. And it is these personalities that provide us insight into the inner workings of the human mind, of psychology. By understanding psychology, we can then begin to understand ourselves, which hopefully creates opportunities for us to in turn understand others, even when we might not agree with them. All of the characters that we've analyzed so far have all involved what we might call neuroatypical psychoses, extreme examples of patterns of behavior. Bennett provides us with an opportunity to look at a more common psychosis, which is exciting because it is these more accepted forms of mental struggle that will oftentimes be left by the wayside and left unattended. And the worst part about more common psychoses, like a lack of self-esteem, is that many will call this something everyone just deals with. And this line of thinking dumbs down a very serious disorder for those that are struggling with it. There is not a person out there who hasn't experienced at least some point in their lives a lack of self-esteem. Whether you failed a test or didn't get a job, our moods can act like swinging pendulums, constantly swaying back and forth depending on the outcomes of our endeavors. Self-esteem is what keeps that pendulum at the center, in a place of balance between our good days and our bad days. The irony here is that our self-esteem really should not have anything to do with external forces at all. So what's happening here? Self-esteem itself is necessary for maintaining confidence in ourselves and is what allows us to act out our agency. Without it, we become paralyzed due to unfiltered anxiety with nothing to temper it. To put it simply, we are internalizing our external circumstances, blaming our identities for something that has nothing to do with our identity. This is what happens when you base your identity on what you do rather than who you are. An example of this is I failed the test because I'm a bad person, rather than I failed the test because I didn't study or the test was unfair. Now be careful, because it can be very easy to mistake the reason of I didn't study to I'm a person incapable of studying. One of these can be changed, the other cannot. We attribute the failure to a core notion of our very being, rather than keeping what is external in the external. Failing a test is not intrinsic to who we are. This allows us to recognize the mistakes of the past and then change them. Whereas if you blame your identity, then there's nothing you can do apart from accepting the results as inevitable. This is exactly what is happening to Bennett.
Teamwork is dreamwork!
Bennett's lack of self-esteem likely comes from several specific events from his past, as most psychoses do. He was, and still is, the leader of a group called Benny's Adventure Team, which is part of the Adventurers Guild. The problem is that, at present, he's the only member of the group. Unfortunately, due to a series of unfortunate events, something would happen in each of their adventures. Members of the group would come and go, but the same string of unfortunate events would still happen, prompting members to, rather forcefully, bestow a reputation of having bad luck on Bennett. Since he is the common denominator, it must be his fault. Sound logic, right? Over time, this reputation would weigh on Bennett's mind as he would begin to believe this fictitious pattern himself. And that's pretty much Bennett's story. Even though it's quite simplistic, there's quite a lot to unpack here. Let's start with a demonstration, shall we? Look at these 3 images. Now, tell me what comes next. If we're being objective, really any shape can come next because there is no innate pattern being shown here. However, some of you might have thought a triangle would come next. Why? Because if you add a triangle to these shapes, they become the 4 buttons on a PlayStation controller. Here we have created a pattern where there really is none due to our past experiences. Like we just demonstrated, human beings are designed to find patterns. It is one of the most basic abilities that has led to our survival and in turn becoming the apex animal on Earth. I would assume that this is true in Teyvat as well for all the mortals. Although, with the introduction of the Archons, mortals have probably gotten a sizable advantage with literal gods leading them. Bennett, alongside his compatriots, observed external events, searched for a reason for why these events were happening, and ended up blaming Bennett because he was the most consistent part of the pattern that they created. An example of this is explained in Bennett's Hangout event concerning the first member of Benny's adventure team to leave, Jack. Just before they would reach treasure, an extremely rare geoturbulence occurred, opening a massive chasm, impeding them from obtaining the treasure. Disillusioned, Jack would leave the group and blame Bennett for his bad luck, beginning the cycle. Later on, another member named Royce would blame Bennett's luck on the cave they were in collapsing, but the truth is that Klee was outside and mistook the cave as a rabbit hole, and she just wanted to close it up. And Heckler, another member, suffered from diarrhea after joining for a week. It was confirmed to be food poisoning, but Heckler, who was probably subscribed to Bennett's reputation, blamed him instead. These and many more events would cause Bennett to not only accept the pattern as a natural, reoccurring truth, but he would also internalize this reputation into his identity. Even though there were many external explanations for each of the members' misfortune, Bennett would learn to blame himself, as everyone else had already done so. This is how our brains can oftentimes use logic to trick ourselves into thinking things that aren't true. Eventually, these external explanations would no longer matter, as Bennett's identity would take on the form of this blame. The pattern has transformed into a belief. This brings us to present day, where if Bennett is given the opportunity to blame himself, citing that he is the source of all misfortune, he will.
Well, that's true. But then again, the unpredictable is to be expected when my luck's involved.
This creates what is called in psychology a self-fulfilling prophecy, or the Pygmalion Effect, which explains that if someone expects an outcome, whether positive or negative, they will anticipate the result and unknowingly help cause the outcome to happen. In Bennett's case, he assumes that all misfortune is because of him, and by assuming this, he unknowingly guides his own actions to cause said misfortune. This is why we find him locked in cages all the time, and each time this happens, it reinforces his belief that he is the source of all misfortune. This cyclical nature is intrinsic to many psychoses, and without something or someone to counteract the belief, it will spiral out of control as it has with Bennett. One other concept that we can apply here is the Nocebo Effect. Most of you are probably familiar with the placebo effect, where if one believes something will happen, there is a higher likelihood of something happening due to this expectation. The Nocebo effect is the opposite, where negative expectations will lead to a higher likelihood of more negative outcomes due to expectation. Bennett believes that he has bad luck. This belief is what could be influencing the negative events to actually occur. My only hope for Bennett is that he continues to spend time with characters like the Traveler and Paimon, who, as we can see in the new Dragonspine event in 2.3, are actively challenging Bennett's reinforced yet misplaced beliefs. And yes, I understand that he can seem a little annoying at times because of how pessimistic he sounds, but Bennett has tons of evidence to support the idea that he is the source of all misfortune, so he can't really help it. He blames himself in order to protect his friends from having to take responsibility for events that have no one to blame. But by doing so, he digs himself further and further into the hole that is his bad luck. Even spending time with Amber, Fischl, Barbara, or even Cyrus, as we read in Bennett's character stories, who have more upbeat, optimistic personalities, can have a healthy influence that could one day help make Bennett's dream of rebuilding Benny's adventure team a reality. To end off this video, I want to make light of the fact that even with Bennett's unfortunate reputation, he is undoubtedly the best support in Genshin Impact, unless you C6'd him, of course, which I guess that would make him the second best support, next to his C5 counterpart. Is this just a coincidence, or is this intentional on the part of MiHoYo to have a character who thinks he's the least supportive person due to his repulsive bad luck be the best support in the game when it comes to gameplay? I do hope that Bennett will eventually match his psychology with how much of a powerhouse he is for so many players. I want him to know how excited people were and cheered him on during the 2.3 preview when he was revealed to play a part in the story, and when they saw him use his elemental burst in the cutscene. And finally, I do hope that all of us can learn a thing or two from Bennett, that it is not your achievements or your deeds or your bad luck that defines you, but it is who you are and how you treat others that matters. And I think Bennett has both of these traits in strides. But of course, what do you think? Is Bennett suffering from a lack of self-esteem, or is his bad luck truly intrinsic to his very being? Is Bennett the most unlucky person ever, or is he possibly partly causing problems for himself due to his own misguided belief that he is the source of all misfortune? If there is a character in Genshin Impact that you think would be worth psychoanalyzing, let me know in the comments and I will do my best to look into the possibilities. And if you have your own thoughts about Bennett's possible psychosis, jot them down there as well. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. By liking the video and subscribing to the channel, you'll be actively telling YouTube that this video and all my other videos are worth watching. Better yet, please share this video with a fellow Genshin Impact player or maybe even a streamer so that we can get started on a dialogue on the psychological aspects of these characters we all love. And follow me on Twitter to know when I post and read some Genshin memes along the way. And thank you for visiting A Little Psychology in Teyvat.
Hey, my name's Pygmalion. That's not true. Smart questions. Why would you ask that? Hey, try on. We're being untitled. Not my words. Vengeance will be mine. Paimon's all out of brain juice again.